Okay, so thank you everybody. I'm Eve, and today I will present you my master project, which is about the application of the evolutionary chain method to the study of raw material provenance for a site called La Fosse that is situated in the Armorican Massif. I did this study with thanks to the Einer Taya that funded this project. So first of all, I'd like to talk a bit more about the material issues and why it is important to study these questions. Indeed, it can be very helpful to better understand the economic behaviors of hunter-gatherers and especially their mobilities and rock resources management. And these questions are very interesting for the area that interest us. So in our case, the west of France. So as you can see on this map, in the Armorican Massif situated westward, we have no flint outcrops, except some coastal barriers that are on the Britannic coast. And on the contrary, eastward, we have another region, the southwest of the Paris Basin, that is wearing a lot of outcrops that are very rich in flints, and these flints are of very, very good quality. And on top of that, for this region, we have also several rivers that are crossing the territory, such as the Loire, that is the biggest river in France, the Loire also without an E, be careful, the Cher, and also the Vienne. So the question for this region was during late Paleolithic, how does the Armorican Massif inhabitants, how they did to fulfill their rock resources needs? And for addressing this question, La Fosse is very interesting because it has an in-between location between the Armorican Massif and the Paris Basin. To put a bit more of context, the site of La Fosse is situated in Mayenne in France here, and it has been dated from the late Laborian according to its industries. And these ones have some very particular characteristics, which are that they are very regular, they show a flat cross-section and also a straight profile. And in order to reach these technical particularities, you have to it's very demanding in terms of raw materials quality. So that's why we investigated the Turonian formations that are very rich with flints quality. In order to describe our raw materials, we base our observations on sedimentary geology and micropaleontology to describe the constitutive elements of the flints. These elements can be of several nature. They can be detrital, chemical, or biological. And we also observe at the stigmata that are resulting from the transports of these blocks along watercourses, for example, and that are situated on the cortex and on the surfaces of the flint blocks. So we will describe the type of shocks, cementation, the type of recrystallizations, and also of porosities that elements can suffer. So now I will talk a bit more about the evolutionary chain method and settings. So the principle of this method is to make the link between primary outcrops and secondary deposits of rocks, describing both phases. And the aim is to follow a flint along its travel from the primary outcrops all along watercourses until its final residence in alluvial formations, for example. And so afterwards, when comparing archaeological artifacts with geological samples, we can try to propose an accurate location gatherers collect points in primary positions or in secondary ones along watercourses. So what I did for my study, I had access to the Petra Rock Library that is situated in Rennes, and that gathers samples from Normandy and from the Loire region, as you can see on this map. Here just shows the samples from the Loire region. And the primary outcrops are labeled with triangles and the secondary one with circles. And a little remark, we just focused on the flints for this study and on those ones that were attributed to Turonian stages. So as you can see on this map, there is a first gap in our data that is situated in the Maine-et-Loire, what prevented us from making accurate hypothesis for this region, but I will talk about that a bit more afterwards. And in total, I could study 61 geological samples and describe it. And now for the archaeological sampling, we based our sampling on Jérémy Jacquier PhD work. So I looked at the artifacts that were constrained in this red square, and it makes more, it crosses one combustion area, and it makes more than 1,000 artifacts. So for feasibility reasons, and also in order to be sure that we'll cross the data with functional afterwards, we only looked at the artifacts that were in traces. And in total, it makes 122 archaeological artifacts that I described and compared with the geological samples. So here are my first results for the geological referential. So among the 61 geological samples, I could describe 23 different types of raw materials for this region. And among them, I could describe 6 evolutionary chains. So as you can see on the map, it's the colored triangles and circles. So you can see that I could track some raw materials for the very first primary position until final residence, sometimes more than 100 kilometers far, further, sorry. But in between, sometimes are very poor resolution of evolutionary chains. So it has been a constraint for my study to propose accurate locations of hunter-gatherer collect points. And for the raw materials, I described 18 groups and reached 85% of sourcing for the assemblage. However, I didn't describe subgroups. It just means that I considered that for one archaeological, for one raw material group, hunter-gatherer collected this raw material at one single place and not in several deposits. So here is the main result that synthesize the main map that synthesize my analysis and hypothesis. But before to go deeper in the analysis, I'd like to make a few remarks on it to keep in mind. First of all, the pointed locations that I show you here are not the hunter-gatherer collect points, but the points, the locations where we collected the data, the geological samples, and it's just after comparing these points, these archaeological artifacts with geological ones, that we can propose that these are effectively hunter-gatherer points or collect points or not. Secondly, the lines I draw here are not the routes that were taken by hunter-gatherers, but it's just to show the relationship between the deposits and the site, and it's important also to keep in mind. And finally, some of the location I showed you are not linked to the site with the full line. It's because their provenance hypothesis mainly relies on their micropaleontological context. Indeed, the foraminifera, for example, I found in these archaeological samples were proposed to. So we propose an attribution to a geological formation for these artifacts. So now we come to the results. So for the first case, I will talk about the samples that were wearing primary position cortex. So especially for the Sarthe, the Bajocene flints from the Sarthe region here, and the Bassonian from the Camp Plain, we can indeed make the hypothesis that these points represent hunter-gatherer collect points, because there's archaeological pieces were wearing a primary position cortex. The second case encompasses the flints from the Loire without an E region right here. They were showing cortex with secondary or subprimary deposit features, but unfortunately the evolutionary chains that we had for these materials were too poor in terms of resolution, so didn't allow her to place accurately these poles along the Loire or the Loire without an E watercourses. And for the third case, it concerns a provenance here that was like one or two pieces of my assemblage, and these pieces were not wearing cortex at all, so it was not wearing enough stigmata to suggest the provenance from one type of deposits or another. So for the moment, it's not possible to know whether it comes from primary outcrops or from secondary ones, and to make a strong hypothesis on their collect points by hunter-gatherers. So to conclude, the first conclusion is that all the materials of La Fosse assemblage are coming from far, even though this word is really subjective. And they show pretty diverse provenance, which is interesting. For some of the raw materials, we could approach the collect locations by hunter-gatherers, for example, for the Camp Bathonian and the Jossian ones. And for the others, it was not possible for the moment to give a precise but we made hypotheses on the primary provenances. And it would be very interesting to approach a more precisely collect points because it allows to further discuss socioeconomic practices and especially mobilities, and to make a link with other sites of the region. It would be very great. But to do that, it requires to fill our data in terms of geological samples, and also to cross the data with functional and technological approaches. And studies are further planned to fill this gap of data. And I hope we could go further in the next years. So thank you for your attention, everybody. Thank you also to the committee that accepted my proposal. Thank you to my supervisors and to all the people that allowed me to do this presentation. Thank you very much.